make a fresh loaf of bread at home, you need only 4 ingredients: flour, water, salt and yeast. And collectively, they cost less than the price of a single shop-bought loaf. But making bread can be time-consuming. Automating the process with a machine should make things simpler. But how much of your hard-earned dough should you spend to get a good value model? Well, I'm going to find out by testing these 2 bread makers. Our premium machine is from Panasonic, and it's a favourite of Ideal Home and Good Housekeeping magazines. It comes with 32 programmes, yeast and nut dispensers, and a 13-hour delay timer, so you can wake up to freshly baked bread in the morning, all for £239.99. Our budget offering is the Homebake from British brand Morphy Richards, available for nearly 200 quid less, a rather tasty £44.99. This one has just 14 programmes, but it also has a delay timer and this handy viewing window, so you can keep an eye on your loaf as it bakes. To help me test both machines, I've enlisted the expertise of Graham Kinnear, who made history at last year's World Bread Awards. Graham, wonderful to see you. Tell me about your recent success.
I was fortunate enough to have my loaves judged first, second and third.
What, nobody else got a look in?
Nobody else got a look in.
I'm a champion of champions. Right, time to test our bread makers to see which one Graham thinks offers the best value. I'll start by giving him a rundown of their most interesting features. With the premium Panasonic, there's an automatic nut and raisin dispenser and also an automatic yeast dispenser. Is an automatic yeast dispenser an advantage?
Not essential, but I can see why they probably put one on, so they mix it up to start with before the yeast actually starts to act on the dough.
You get some useful measuring devices supplied and 2 blades.
Yeah, I believe one's for rye bread.
Let's move on to the budget Morphy Richards. I mean, the first thing I noticed is it's got a window in the top.
Quite helpful, that, I would have thought, so you can just check everything's mixing all right.
Again, you get some accessories.
And obviously slightly more compact.
On first impressions, is the one you favour?
I would say you probably want the more compact model for the worktop.
So the Morphy Richards for less real estate occupied in the kitchen?
I think so.
So, a good start for the budget Morphy Richards. But will it continue to impress in our first test? We're going to make a medium white loaf in both machines, following the manufacturer's recipes.
Flour goes in first.
And we're starting with the Panasonic. And then this has the automatic yeast dispenser.
This goes into the yeast dispenser. What this machine does do is have a rest period when you start it for all the ingredients to, I suppose, get to know each other.
Including that rest period, the overall baking time for the Panasonic is 4 hours.
Right. So we've just got to press the button and...
Yes.
That's all there is to it.
Next up, the budget Morphy Richards. It doesn't have a yeast dispenser, so all the ingredients need to go into the bread tin at the start of the bake.
Close the lid.
Yep.
It's telling us it's going to be 3 hours to bake.
3 hours as opposed to 4 hours. Why, do you think?
I would think this one mixes a bit more. That might improve the bread a bit more at the end, but we'll see once it all comes out.
So the budget Morphy Richards is straight into it. And we can see it doing things.
Definitely.
Great. While the bread makers are hard at work, Graham and I can loaf around.
Quantity surveying is my day job.
What are the similarities between quantity surveying and baking?
I suppose measurement.
3 hours later, and the budget Morphy Richards loaf is ready.
Not too bad. I've noticed that round this side, see we've got a bit of flour that hasn't quite mixed properly in the machine before baking.
After another hour, the premium Panasonic's loaf is ready for inspection.
On the basis of looks, Panasonic definitely the winner, I think.
But how will they compare when it comes to taste? We start by assessing a slice of the premium Panasonic's loaf.
Yes. It's got quite a nice structure, quite springy. On first look, it looks all right.
Yes. But it's certainly created a good volume of loaf.
It has. This one has got quite a significant rise on it compared to that one. I think for a bread machine, that's a pretty decent effort.
Let's move on to the Morphy Richards.
It's definitely a closer structure and a more dense structure. Probably a little bit cakey in its texture.
I would have described it as cakey. I think
definitely more dense though, and a bit more chewy than the Panasonic one. The main difference between the two really is the structure, the closeness of the crumb. This one is definitely a more open loaf.
What's your verdict on test one?
It'd definitely be this one.
So, when it comes to white loaves, the premium Panasonic rises to the occasion best. But can the budget Morphy Richards redeem itself when we attempt a much more elaborate creation, one of Graham's award-winning bakes?
Oh dear.
Seems to have stopped.
This is a brioche. Brioche is an enriched dough with eggs, milk and butter. But also what I've put in there is pink praline, just to give it a sugary flavour inside.
That is gorgeous. I've never had brioche like this before.
Thank you.
We're following Graham's recipe, so the same ingredients go into both bread makers. The only difference is that the premium Panasonic has more versatile programmes that can be adjusted.
The Panasonic does allow you a reasonable amount of manual control. You can sort of set your own times.
You've got two programmes on here, one for kneading and one for the rise, so you can set the times, whereas on the Morphy Richards, you've just got one set dough programme.
They've got a very high standard to match. Bravo.
So yeast in first?
Yeast in first.
With the ingredients added to the tin, the Panasonic is ready to start. Graham opts for 25 minutes of mixing, followed by 90 minutes rising time.
And away we go.
Next, we load up the budget Morphy Richards.
That's 1.5 hours. That'll mix for 20 minutes and then rise for 1 hour and 10.
How much easier is this than doing it by hand?
Well, definitely easier. You're letting the machine do the donkey work, really.
5 minutes before the end of the mixing process, the pink pralines are added to the Panasonic machine. But Graham looks concerned.
Oh, dear.
Seems to have stopped.
Thankfully, though, the nuts soon begin to mix in.
That's all right. Just mixing round now.
So now the budget Morphy Richards needs to get its pralines.
Yep. Sprinkle those in. This machine seems to be just handling the praline a little bit better than the Panasonic, actually. It's quite rattly, the Panasonic, but this still sounds quite nice, smooth in its mix.
After mixing is complete, both machines let their dough rise. The budget Morphy Richards does this for 20 minutes less, so finishes first. But it's clear that's not something to be proud of.
It does look quite slack. Expect it to be a bit firmer than that.
The paddle out.
Paddle out.
And while both machines can prep specialist dough, turning it into bread needs some manual intervention.
It's not really sort of got together as a dough. Quite sticky, so that would suggest it probably needed a lot more mixing. So what we'll do, we'll divide it and we'll see what we can do with it.
Persevering.
You got to.
Right. Ah, the beep.
Let's see if the premium Panasonic's dough is more successful.
That looks as if that's mixed a lot better.
You can tell it looks less slack.
Yeah. You see it's much more cohesive, not spread. This is so much easier to handle. It's staying together, it's not spreading at all.
Yes.
I don't think it's quite as cohesive as the one I'd have at home, but it's not far away, really.
Having left both brioches to rise for another hour and given them the same time again in the oven, it's tasting time.
I mean, clearly is a big difference in appearance, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think when we actually took them out of the machine, I was really worried about this one because it hadn't really mixed properly at all. It was very slack, very difficult to deal with, almost impossible to shape. There's a distinct difference in volume between the Morphy Richards and the Panasonic.
Yep. Appearance-wise, the Morphy Richards is a bit of a failure, really, frankly. And whereas the Panasonic gets closer to
what own. You tasted earlier, the one that I brought in.
So the premium Panasonic wins on looks.
Ooh,
but how do the bread makers compare on taste?
So it is quite, quite soft inside. It doesn't taste too bad at all.
How will the budget Morphy Richards brioche compare?
I mean, straight away, you can see this one is more dense.
Once again, in round two, we've got a clear victory for the Panasonic.
I think so. I don't think there's much doubt about that.
So, the Panasonic wins both tests, but at 5 times the price of the Morphy Richards, is it really worth that extra dough?
If you're on a budget and you want a bread maker, the Morphy Richards was far better than buying shop-bought bread. But in my opinion, not on the level of the Panasonic.
Given the fact that it's been so much better in our 2 tests, I think you have to say it is the better value for money out of the 2.
I think so, yeah.